So, stages of surrender. I was teaching stages of faith for a number of years when someone just asked the question, if you're stuck and you have no mentor to help you, is there anything you can do? And that got me to thinking, and came up with the idea of stages of surrender. In other words, looking at the various points where people get stuck and then saying, what is something one can surrender that can actually open the way for God? And that's what got me started along these lines. And it goes back to, of course, the core text, Mark 4, which basically says that the farmer, night and day, seed sprouts and grows, though he does not know how. And all by itself, the soil produces the grain, first the stalk, then the head, then the full kernel in the head. So just reviewing, it's developmental. So there is moving along in different stages, progressing, etc., and it's not by human effort. So what I'm going to share this afternoon is not human effort in the sense to get God to work, to make him work, to manipulate the situation, but it's a little bit different. Surrender points. It's, if there's a better word, I'm still open, okay? But I don't know of a better word. It's a metaphor, and it kind of implies a power differential. Somebody stronger defeats you, give up, surrender and become their slave or whatever needs to happen. So it's easily misunderstood, but that's not where I'm going with this. Where I'm going with this is the idea of clearing out any blockages to God's blessing. Open a channel of blessing. And for me, a good metaphor is actually at the time that I did this, stages of surrender, I had just finished a workers' meeting in the state of Hawaii. And my wife and I thought, let's take a few days while we're here and go see the volcanoes. And in case you're not aware, in Hawaii there are active volcanoes. And so among the things that were on my mind that week were what they call Kilauea Iki in Hawaiian. That's the little Kilauea. Kilauea is the most active part of the volcanic chain in Hawaii right now. And it's actually on the slopes of Mauna Loa, which is a much older and taller volcano. And it's sort of a vent that comes out on the side and pours down to the ocean. So it's a fun place to visit, interesting place to visit. We went down to the main road along the beach and came to a dead end because there was a big bunch of hardened lava across the road, and that's the end of the road. There's no point in reopening the road because the next outpouring will cover it again. So while we were there, we heard a fascinating story. In 1959, there was a crater at Kilauea Iki, Little Kilauea, that was about 800 feet deep. Right, so it's a sheer sides, sort of in a bowl at the top of the mountain, and we were able to stand on the side of it and look down, then later to walk through it. But in 1959, a vent opened up in the side of the crater, about 400 feet above the crater floor. The vent opened up and lava shot into the air as high as 2,000 feet. And the lava was just, a big fountain, and if you were across the crater a mile away, it was too hot to view. In other words, you'd have to take a look and then go behind a tree or something because just the heat was so intense a mile away. This liquid rocks, basically, flying in the air in liquid form, then landing inside the crater. And this went for months, and gradually the crater was filling up with fresh lava. And it filled and filled until it reached the point of the vent. And then the lava lake poured back down into the vent and sealed it up. And so today, the floor of the crater is about 400 feet below the rim. Same rim, but the entire floor of the crater rose 400 feet in 1959. And you can go there today and walk across the floor of the crater. It's a very exciting experience. There's steam coming up through cracks. And if you take a look at some of the bigger cracks, there's sort of an orange glow down there, and it's pretty exciting stuff. If it wasn't safe, they wouldn't let you go there, right? Whoever they are, right? Okay, yeah. The government says it's all safe. You go right ahead. Anyway, of course, to me, anybody says it's dangerous, I'm saying, that sounds like fun. But anyway, but here's my point. There was a channel there, and this lava was pointing through, and when the channel was plugged, the lava stopped. And that to me is a metaphor of spiritual stuckiness. When you get stuck in a place, it's simply because something in your life is plugging up the channel that God would like to use to bless you and to grow you and to improve your life. So it's in that sense, stages of surrender. When you're stuck, it's because there's a blockage preventing God's blessing from getting through to you. It's not that God will bless you less. God is right there, wanting to grow you, bless you all the time. But sometimes there are things that we allow in our lives that prevent that from happening. Stages of surrender is those points where if we become aware of something in us that is preventing God from doing that work that we can't do, we allow Him to do His work. So I would say these stages of surrender, it's a progression of 8 stages. Why 8? Because at the beginning, there's barriers to keep you from accepting the gospel, from coming to Jesus. So that's the first stage of blockage. When people don't know God, there are things in their lives often they're hanging on to that don't allow them to invite God in. So the first stage would be before stage 1. And then the dark night of the soul also has stages of surrender. Because the whole point here is whenever you come stuck and there's no one there to help you, no stage 4 mentor or whatever, is there something you can do to unblock the way? So each of these stages kind of builds on the preceding one. And what I suggest is, there's about 11 different surrender points here. I don't think any of you are going to relate to all of them, but I think all of you will probably relate to some of them. For me, there's 3, and I'll tell you when we get there. There's 3 of these that are constantly dogging me, and so I think there's something in here for everybody, but maybe not the whole thing. All right, so let's start with the beginning, the call of the gospel. The big question, what is the gospel? Well, the biblical definition is very simple and very unclear to most people. The gospel is the death and resurrection of Jesus, period. Read 1 Corinthians 15. Paul says, this is what was handed down to me. This is what I preached to you. This is what we live by. Namely, Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures. He was buried. He was raised according to the Scriptures. And He was proclaimed by many as being raised. So you have the death of Christ. You have the burial, which verifies that He died, right? Then you have the resurrection and the witness, which verifies that He rose from the dead. So death and resurrection is the gospel. Well, what does that mean? Why did Christ die? because he adopted the human condition. And while he never sinned himself, our sin was laid on him. So hanging on the cross, Jesus represented the entire human race in its human sinful condition. And as the judgment looked at the human race in its sinfulness, the judgment was not worthy to live. But at the resurrection, Jesus also represented the human race and was fully accepted by God in his righteousness. And when he rose, we rose with him. So the gospel is two messages. Number one, it's a message about the human condition. You stink. You're wretched. You're miserable, poor, blind, naked, right? That's the judgment on the human race. But at the resurrection of Christ, well done, good and faithful servant. Rise and enter into the joy of your Lord. That's the gospel. So the gospel is two messages. It's a message about the human condition, and it's a message about God's perfect acceptance. One of the challenges is that often gospels that are preached are only half a gospel. Some preaching is all about what's wrong with you people. You know, right? Scolding people for all the mistakes that they've made. All right? That's part of the gospel, but it's not the whole story. Other gospels are simply, God accepts you as you are, come on, but there's no invitation to reality. The gospel comes home when people face the reality of who they really are. When you really know your sin. When you really know where you stand. That is part of a bigger picture. At the same time, recognizing that in ourselves we are hopeless and we are even worthless, at least in our perspective, but in Jesus Christ we are acceptable to God in every sense of the term, and we are accepted in him. So the death and resurrection of Christ give two messages to the human race. So when you embrace the gospel, you're embracing two things. That there's nothing in you that merits God's favor. Nothing. But that in Christ there's everything about the human race that God longs to receive and to accept. So the gospel is embracing both of those things. And here's where the barriers come in. You see, because one reaction to the gospel is, I'm not so bad, right? Well, I'm a good person. Ever hear anyone say that? Oh, I'm a good person. I don't need the cross, I don't need some big thing to happen. The other reaction is, I'd rather do it myself, right? So human beings tend to reject the gospel on one or both bases. One is that I don't need salvation, and the other one's, well, I do, but I'll do it myself. Thank you very much. So there's the surrender points. To surrender the feeling of, to rejection of reality. Say, Lord, I surrender my sense that I'm better than I really am. On the other hand, I surrender my need to do it myself. To embrace the gospel is to embrace that you can't do it yourself and that you desperately need it. So the surrender points at the call of the gospel are right there. And again, I don't know where any of you are, so what really hits home is where God needs you to be right now. Romance stage, remember the sense of unworthiness and being comfortable with ignorance and with superstition. So there's two possible sticking points in stage one. One is that you don't feel worthy of God's involvement. In that very sense, you shrink back from God accepting you because it makes you feel even more unworthy. Or on the other hand, just comfortable with ignorance. To move on to stage two means giving up my comfort zone. So surrender points here is surrender that sense of unworthiness. It's irrelevant to God's attitude toward you, but it can get in the way if you embrace it. If you embrace that you're unworthy, you might, step away from God because you fear what God might do to you. On the other hand, some people are just comfortable in stage one. It's kind of fun, and I don't want the obligations or whatever that would happen to move on. So surrendering the sense of unworthiness and also surrendering the comfort zone. I think that's a big one for a lot of us. We like our comfort zone. Where we are. I know sometimes people say, I love our little church, just the way it is. And it may be very lovely. But if it stays a comfortable little church, it isn't going to accomplish much in the world. Surrendering the comfort zone. Stage 2, of course, we remember the challenges: legalistic and judgmental, rigid, us against them mentality. So what would be the surrender points here? It seems to me one of them is the need to be right. The need to be certain. This one hits home to me. I like to know what's going on. I like the facts. I like to have the ducks neatly lined up. We have a lot of ducks near our house, and they don't line up neatly most of the time. Occasionally you'll see nice little, like a bunch of steamboats all one after another, but usually they're not that way. All right, the need to be right. I remember our daughter Tammy, when she was 7, came up to me one day and she announced, "Daddy, I know everything." Okay, I guess that's kind of typical of 7-year-olds, but I thought I might challenge this certainty. So I asked her the question, all right, well, I'm glad to know that. Then you can tell me why the sky is blue. So why is the sky blue? She thought for a minute, and then she said, well, I know everything but that. That is certainty, okay? All right, so the need to be right, to need to have it all together. It's tempting for a speaker when someone asks a difficult question to say more than you actually know, because they're expecting you to know more than you actually know. So it's tempting, you see, the need to be right, the need to be certain, the need to be better than others, the competitive spirit. And I don't have it as strongly as my Argentine son-in-law. I mean, he'll compete to the death on anything, whether it's a game of cards or chess or whatever. He's determined to win, and I've got a lot of that myself. So that's a surrender point, I think, that kind of hits home a little bit there. Need to be right, need to be better than other people are. So if you recognize any of these things, it's not a difficult task. It's just saying, God, here's an area I need to lay before you. And here's the good news. Just because you say it once doesn't mean it's over, okay? It's okay to surrender day after day after day until your emotional side begins to catch up. I like to think of feelings as feelings are a lagging indicator. In other words, you may be right with God for 10 years and not feel like you are. So the feelings come later. And the same can be true with some of these surrender points. You can surrender. I mean, it's like forgiving somebody, right? There are some people you need to forgive 1,000 times before it begins to sink in. Yeah, I guess I really did forgive that person, So, success stage, motivated by applause, perfectionism, being right. So some of these are recognizable also in stage 2. Yes?
What are
The 3 Ps. Good point. I meant to say that in the morning, but people were hungry. Anyway, the 3 Ps are possessions, performance, and people. In other words, we are motivated by what we can get from it, money perhaps, or applause or whatever, or we're motivated out of this need to be better, performance. And the problem with performance is you can be great and it doesn't last. I remember one day I was a professor at the seminary at Andrews University, and I played third base on a softball team. That was the day I made 4 errors. And I was depressed for 3 days. Think about that, okay? 3 days over a softball game, right? But, that need to be the best is something that can be very challenging. I think of Joe Montana. Many of you may never have heard of him, but he was probably the best quarterback of his generation. Some people still think that he's the best that ever played the game. And when he got to age 38, his team decided that they needed to move into the future. And so they cut him from the team. And the Kansas City Chiefs came along and said, Joe Montana is available as a free agent. We would have traded for him 10 years ago, the whole team, So they snapped him up. At the age of 38, he was magnificent. He would just march the team up and down the field, but he kept getting injured. And half of the games he was in the hospital or in the trainer's room and things like that. You see, the glory that comes from performance doesn't last. And eventually you get old. Eventually the teachers go senile, And some people wonder about me already. And, so it's if you're going to live on your performance, it's only going to last so long. All right? And then the third P is people, where you gain your sense of self-worth from the people, their praise, their devotion to you, etc. And of course the problem is people can fail you too. They can leave, they can move away, they can divorce you, they can die. I had a lady once call up, my husband went and died on me. She was mad. He had no right to do that, She needed him around. So and I don't want to make light of it. That was a genuine reaction, and I'm honored that she could share it. But the loss is real, you see. So people who are motivated by possessions, performance, and people, it's a fleeting path to self-worth, etc. So at the success stage, we're sometimes motivated by possessions, performance, people, perfectionism, being right. So surrender points, surrender the need for applause. Jesus was never elated by applause or downcast by censure. I'm not sure I'm there yet. So surrender point, when we recognize it, surrender the drive for perfection. Wanting to be the best that you can be, there's nothing wrong with that. But there's a certain perfectionism where it becomes such a focus of your life that you can accomplish nothing else. There's a type of perfection, for example, that says, is there any mustard in the salad dressing? And so you're going through life reading labels, this, that, and so concerned about those kind of things, you don't have time for the people you love. Is that a perfection worth having? You see? And so perfectionism, that kind of a drive, if you surrender the drive for perfection, you might have a better chance of actually getting there. Because those who are focused on perfection tend not to get there. If you're focused on Jesus and loving people, you just might get there and be surprised when you get there. And then again, the need for certainty. These are some things that can be focused on there. And then, of course, the dark night of the soul. Some challenges there. The temptation to hypocrisy, returning to stage 3. Temptation to just leave God entirely or leave your denomination or whatever. These are some challenges that come in the dark night of the soul. To simply surrender to the suffering. That's the hard part. If this is the path God has marked out for you, now it doesn't matter what other people think. If this is where God has you, to surrender to God's leading to the suffering, to surrender a false sense of purpose. You know, often in stage 3, we have this purpose that's not really ours, but it's the one we think we should have. And to surrender ambitions and plans that aren't in line with God's full intention for us. Continuing to surrender, applause, perfection, certainty. You've heard those before, but the dark night is a wonderful opportunity to put those to bed. And then the journey inward. You remember we talked about consumed with self-assessment or negative thinking. That's not a huge problem for me, negative thinking. Maybe at 4:30 in the morning, I can feel that until I get up. But there's a lot of people, good people, godly people, who whenever the mind is in neutral is always wandering in these dark places. And surrender, to simply say, Lord, I don't want this. I'm giving it to you. And say it until it's real. It might take 10 years. It might, but it's worth getting rid of, right? So, surrender points, surrendering negative thinking, and hidden pride. This is one I learned not so long ago, and it was a real insight. Everybody knows what pride is. Muhammad Ali, I am the greatest. All right, that's obvious pride. What is hidden pride? No one has ever been treated like I have been treated. No one has ever suffered like I've suffered. No one has ever had to put up with I have to put up with in this family, and so on. That constant litany, that's a subtle form of pride. You see, I am the most persecuted person in history. That's pretty famous. You see the point? So hidden pride is a real, it sneaks up on us. And when you're in this negative whirl of stage 4, to surrender the hidden pride, I think, can be a healthy thing to help us move forward. And then stage 5, the challenge is appearing out of touch, careless about the faith. What's a surrender point for stage 5? This one hit me the hardest. I'm just being honest with you. This one hit me the hardest, and I still have to revisit it frequently. The fear of what other people think. That more than anything drove this whole study on stages of surrender. So I realized that in many ways I was afraid of what other people thought. And of course, if you're a public figure, people give you a lot of reason to fear that because they share their thoughts and they're not always pretty, right? You see. I remember Dwight Nelson once saying to a small group of students that we were teaching, and he said, if you're in the public eye and you're doing good, someone is going to be coming after you. Someone is going to be coming after you. And that was his experience, and I think that's true of many people that seek to do things for God. So we sometimes get stuck in being afraid of what other people are thinking. And obviously, more often than not, they're not thinking at all, right? You're worried about what so-and-so, they're not thinking about you at all. So it's wasted time. Wasted toilet training, whatever you want to call it. It just doesn't, there's no point in it, and yet we indulge in it. At least many of us do a lot. So surrendering the fear of what other people think, that one hit me harder, I think, than any of these others. And then, of course, Dark Night 2, etc. And then the unconditional love. Again, appearing out of touch, neglecting personal needs, etc. Surrender point here. This is maybe a shocker, other-centeredness. Can a person love so much that they're just not treating themselves very well anymore? They're just so focused on others that they're not taking care of themselves. And if a person gets to that point, they may need to say, Lord, I'm going to surrender my other-centeredness and let you just take the lead each day. And if you tell me to go take a shower, I'll go take a shower. If you tell me to have a Twinkie, I'll go have a Twinkie. Okay? I'm going to take care of myself. There is such a thing as mental health. Okay? And for some people, a Twinkie is mental health. It may not be good for your body, but if it's good for the soul for at least a few days, that can help. Anyway, don't make too much of that. I'm just pointing out, I think sometimes we do get into this rut, and need to wake up out of it. Anyway, all right. So, summary of stages of surrender. The first stage, essentially pride. I can do it myself. I'm not so bad. These are prideful statements, surrendering these. Surrendering the sense of unworthiness, surrendering the comfort zone. That's a big one for somebody I know. I like my comfort zone. I don't want to break out of my comfort zone. And so this can be an issue for some. The need to be right, need to be certain, need to be better than others. The need for applause, perfection, certainty. Surrendering a false sense of purpose, and again, the need for certainty. Surrendering negative thinking, hidden pride. Surrendering the fear of what other people think. Surrendering otherness in order to take care of oneself. So, I don't know where you fit, but I think each of us probably fit in here somewhere. And that might be helpful. So, surrender can be difficult. It can feel like the loss of everything. It's amazing when you come to these surrender points, you say, I can't do it. And you say, well, why can't you do it? Well, I just can't. The loss is too great. Can't see past what you're going to lose in surrendering. And Jesus, I think, spoke to that when he said, yes, you lose a lot when you surrender, but it's the path to your true self. Would you rather be a fantasy? Would you rather be a puppet image of yourself? Or would you rather be the person that God designed you to be? That's the big question. So Jesus said, whoever would save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's will save it. So these are tough statements, but Jesus was very clear. If you hang on to your image of yourself, you will never taste the life that I have in mind for you. And if you trust God to want the best for you, then the life he wants for you is the one you would most certainly want for yourself. So there, Brooks, it's not even 4 o'clock.